I used to, as a kid, really believe a movie was happening while I was watching it, especially if I was in the cinema. Be so in it that when the credits started rolling, it's like you're waking up from a dream and you'd go like, holy shit, right, this isn't reality. Like that strange suspension of animation that you're so able to do that in a sense.
To another episode of the Burning Boat Show. We wanted to thank our sponsors on Patreon. If you want to help make this show possible, you can head to the link below. On this episode, we talk about quite a few things, starting with a documentary update that kind of leads into a super interesting conversation about what nostalgia really actually means and how powerful of an emotion it can actually be. Then we get into a bit of a review segment where we talk about some of the films we've been watching recently. And we end by talking about a conversation that we had with our social media wizard, Robin, about how to communicate better within the workplace. So you can kind of skip around to those parts if anything sounds interesting.
It'll be time-coded.
Or not.
That's actually new. We should say, if you scrub over the YouTube video, if you're watching this on YouTube, there'll be time codes separating the different topics. So if you want to just skip to one and just listen to one, that's fine as well.
You can also watch the whole thing. But if you're in a hurry and there's something that you want to get to, that should be a useful tool. Now, on to the episode. Alrighty, here we are. Back again on the Burning Boat Show.
Alrighty.
Episode number 60-something coming your way.
65? Almost at 100.
Not really.
Did the first 50 super quickly, and then the last 15
have been
slow and low, baby. Just like,
but we're back on a regular schedule, once a week, every Wednesday.
Exactly.
I thought it would be interesting to just start off by doing a quick update on the documentary. Some of the posts we've been putting out on Instagram have been getting some likes.
Yes.
Some comments, so it seems that people are interested in that.
Yeah.
Basically, I've been trying to write I am writing a project proposal for the documentary.
Yeah.
Basically a
document,
a collection
of papers
stapled together
with words on them
that tells a complete stranger what this project is about and why it's important and why they should give it some time and eventually hopefully give it some money.
It's for funding.
For funding.
Yeah.
Treatment for funding.
Yeah.
But specifically this week or last week, I had to nail a log line, which for those of you who don't know, a log line is basically a single sentence that explains what the film is about.
Yeah.
It's like when you go on Netflix and you click the little arrow that tells you what this is.
Yeah.
There's a little sentence that says so-and-so is doing this to try and save the end of the world.
Exactly.
Something unexpected happens.
It's like they call it like an elevator pitch, that if you were in the elevator with someone, you could like explain your whole film before they walk out.
Yeah. I mean, it's even shorter than that. It's
like
a single sentence.
It's a really fast elevator.
Line.
I didn't mention that.
Huh?
It's a really fast elevator.
Right. Yeah. One floor.
Mm-hmm.
And it just poses a lot of challenges. It's such a good exercise because it reveals kind of where you're actually at with the project.
Yeah.
How well do you know what the story is?
Yeah.
How clear is the story? Is there even a story?
Yeah.
Who's it about? Like, you need to know all these things to be able to write a concise single sentence that explains everything.
Yeah.
So it's a tough process, but it's totally worth it because it's making me a lot clearer on what it is exactly. I mean, even just being able to talk to you guys about what it is has been a struggle recently.
Right.
I feel like after this, it's going to be a lot easier. So basically this week I'm working on the next step. I keep saying basically. So basically it starts with one sentence, then it goes to a page, and then it goes to like a full 10-page outline. And then the script, if you have a script.
Right.
The idea being that the person reading it can read just the bare minimum. If they're more interested, they can read the next thing. And
Yeah.
if they're still interested, read the next things. You kind of give them more and more information. The next step is a one-pager or an outline. There's many words for it. It's typically something that fits on a single page that explains in a little bit more detail than just a single sentence. What's the story? Who are the characters? Why is this important?
Yeah.
What's the context?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah.
And
Oh my God.
pardon. Let's put that on Do Not Disturb. I was telling someone, don't call me because I'm doing a podcast.
And they went, A-okay,
I
gotcha.
wrote, okay. Yeah, the one pager. Same deal. It's surprising. You think you know your film well
Yeah.
until you have to try and write it down in a single page.
Yeah. I agree. I remember in film school, they'd always say how important that was. And I'd be always like, dude, you can't put me in a box like that. I can't explain my film in one sentence. And then you realize that, oh, your film is way too like complicated.
It's a problem.
It doesn't make sense.
It highlights some of the problem areas.
Yeah, you should definitely be able to.
You want it to be about so many different things,
Yeah.
but there's a reason why it should fit on a page, because a film isn't 10 hours long.
Yeah.
Like, you can't explore all the themes.
Yeah.
What's the one theme that you want to touch on the most?
Yeah. It's even, I almost feel like it's more important for yourself than, like, if I read that shit on Netflix, I always think it's like, it never really sells me on the story.
Really?
No.
Okay.
Because they're always so, like, generic, like you kind of gave the example. Like, does this to save the world. It's like, well, I don't know what this is about, or, like, what the... But for you as a filmmaker, you have a direction that you kind of know that you're going in, you know what I mean? I think that's what it's helpful for. I would also imagine that the ones on Netflix are probably written by, like, some intern or something.
They're not
You know, that
quite log lines.
it wouldn't be the one.
They're like more of a marketing tool
Yeah.
to get you to watch it. But that's kind of what a log line is. I mean, there's an element of the log line that is supposed to make the person reading it want to know more.
Yeah, that's true. I've read good log lines. I would say the ones I read on like Netflix or Amazon, I don't think are. But I've definitely like heard someone give a log line and gone like, "Ooh, that's interesting." Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of want to leave it on a what's going to happen next note.
Yeah.
You don't want to explain the whole thing.
And then ...
Yeah. That's kind of what the entire focus has been on in terms of the documentary.
Yes. Because we still need more funding
Yes.
to be able to do what you really want to do.
Yeah. I mean, you can touch on that real quick. The project has always been two parts. It's always been a documenting of my brother's story and what's happening with him. And then there's always been this other side to it where I really want to try and get into the more, like, I guess the subconscious of what's going on. Like, how does it feel to be experiencing those things on like a deeper level, in a more creative way, where you're not just having someone tell you what it feels like. You're able to see it. You're able to feel it in a way. And that's the part that's been evolving and really expanding and growing as the project's gone on and changed a lot of times. And so that's the part that's sometimes a little bit hard to put into words and to get onto the page. And that's also the part that requires funding, because it requires a little bit more in terms of time to create these moments, or budget to be able to fly to go back to some of the places where certain things happened and be able to reflect on them at the actual location where they took place originally. Yeah. And they're just so important to the whole story that it's just the next step is to get more funding for the documentary.
So that's that.
Part of me wanted to like read out the log.
I was going to ask. Why don't you say what you have right now?
I'll say what I have right now.
Yeah.
Pause right here.
Okay.
So the log line that I currently have, I mean, this is rough. This is where it is at the moment. Is 3 years ago, an older brother tried to help his younger brother break free from anxiety and depression in a final and dramatic act. Retracing their steps, they discover that the key to understanding what it all meant lies hidden somewhere in their childhood. Yeah,
I think that's really good.
So the things that I'm trying to kind of cover in this are, well, who's it about? It's about my brother, but I'm also including myself in there because it's told from my perspective, which I think is actually kind of crucial in order to understand what the documentary might be. That it's someone else interested in this story and telling it from their perspective. Then I'm also trying to kind of get the when in there. So the fact that it's 3 years later, I feel like is an interesting and important element about the state of the project. We've had these 3 years to kind of reflect on it. So it's not happening in the moment. It's like maybe there's something about jumping back and forward in time or something like that. And the element of childhood is something that's recently super important. I touched on that in one of the earlier podcasts. I really wanted to get that in there, that there's something about going back and reflecting on our childhoods, looking at childhood footage that has really like done something in my brain. I talked about connecting the birth of my son and seeing footage of my brother as a baby and how that's really just changed my whole outlook on what like childhood means and how crucial it is to who we become. So I really wanted to get that in there and then also make it a little bit like, well, what happens? What's this thing that we're looking for without answering it?
Right.
And it's 2 sentences. Sorry, it's not 1 sentence.
Right.
It's 2 shorter sentences. You keep like doing something so that you want me. I keep thinking that you're about to be like,
no, I'm just
sorry. I'm like, yeah, and then you're like,
yeah.
I'm like,
continue.
Okay, no. My bad.
I think 2 sentences, even though it is 1 sentence, like I would say that's a lot better because it's all like important, pertinent information.
Yeah,
like
when
it adds to the excitement of wanting to know more.
Yeah, I mean, when you see like a 1 sentence log line, it's always like an insanely long sentence that's like a run on multiple places. So you're trying to like fit it. Just put a period and then maybe it's easier to read.
Yeah. You've been working on the documentary quite a bit. And you've mentioned this idea of nostalgia, and I thought it was interesting. You kind of gave me the definition of what that word actually means.
Yeah, did I give you that a while ago, or did I give you that like yesterday?
I think you've said it once before, and then I think you said it to me quite recently again.
Yeah, so I used to be a huge fan of Mad Men, and there's a scene in there where the main character, Don Draper, talks about what the word nostalgia means. I believe in Greek, the way that the word is translated in Greek has to do with the pain from an old wound.
Right.
That nostalgia is this weird combination of like sentiment and a happy feeling, but also pain and like
pain from an old. That's so strange.
This feeling of something that doesn't exist anymore, a longing for something that you can't have, a sadness behind that feeling.
There's definitely a sadness, but like of something good, right? Or of something that you think was good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a very powerful emotion to experience, nostalgia, because it's 2 opposing feelings at the same time. And I can't really think of anything else where you feel that way. So I'm like,
really interesting.
I'm very interested in drawing on that feeling and that emotion.
Right, because you're trying to bring in a lot of elements that you think people would either recognize or have a certain emotion behind while they're watching the documentary.
Something to get them to think about themselves in the past when they were younger.
Right.
Like for me, the feeling of nostalgia can come up from so many different things. It could be like watching a film that I used to watch when I was, a lot younger.
Yeah.
It can even be like the smell of a certain kind of laundry.
Yeah.
The most bizarre thing will happen where I'm like biking on the street and I'll bike by a laundry house where you can really smell the laundry, and instantly I'm in my grandma's house because that's the exact detergent that she used or whatever.
Yeah, that's so interesting because is that nostalgia or is that...
It's the thought that comes afterwards for me. It's the feeling of
But
suddenly,
isn't the longing like something you're already... Oh, so you would have the smell...
And it would trigger
nostalgia.
Something,
and then you would have the nostalgia.
Yeah, yes.
Can we look up what the definition is, Robin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because there's two different things. One where it's like exactly that, like you recognize something from your past, or you see something that you haven't seen in a while.
But then it's the feeling afterwards where you then imagine yourself at that age,
right?
And what you would have done afterwards, and I can like picture what it felt like to be there then, and who I was, and I know that I'm not that anymore.
That's interesting.
So you're instantly thrown back to a memory that no longer...
Yeah, I feel like I would have the memory, but I
past.
wouldn't necessarily then go into like imagining myself there or something. But then I would say I have nostalgia in the sense of like things that I know, where I go like, oh, wasn't it nice? This thing, right? This thing that I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
A sentimental longing or wistful affection for a period in the past.
For a period in the past.
Yeah.
So like a time in
Of
your
the
life or
past, yeah,
something.
yeah.
That's so interesting.
So it's like listening to a song that you haven't heard in like years, but
Right.
that you used to listen to so much when you were, in middle school.
Right.
And
right,
suddenly it comes on, and you can just suddenly it brings back all the memories of being a sixth grader on the bus on your way to school.
Right.
You just broke up with your girlfriend,
Right.
who you'd been together with for a week, and you're listening
never
to
talked to her.
this sad song, and suddenly you're remembering what it felt like to be that age, and who you were then, and who your friends were, and what you were into. And like,
Right.
I think there's also you look at it kind of with
Rose-colored glasses.
yeah, because
Yeah.
you think of all the good things that you miss from being that. There's a temptation to be like, oh, the good old days.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish I could go back, because you're only thinking
Yeah.
of the good stuff.
I always catch myself because I'm like, if you were in that age, you'd be like, oh,
Yeah.
certainly certain things you'd be unhappy with in that moment that you just can't remember. It's weird that we remember like only the positives almost. Or I've had it where like I used to love this video game called Tony Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah.
Right?
Same.
But
Pro Skater
it's
4?
like Pro Skater 4, Underground, and Underground 2 were the shit, right? On PS2. And it's more I guess the mindset I was in playing it back then, because my brother got the game and I was like so excited to play this game. And I was like, okay, the next couple of days, this is all I'm going to do. I'm going to beat this game again. It's going to be so amazing. And I played it for like 20 minutes and I hated it. I was like, I don't like this.
Wait, sorry. You played this again in the...
I played the exact same game as an adult.
Ah.
Right? Having got the game, having got the console, being like, ooh, I'm going to sit here for hours. I'm going to play this game again. And it just wasn't this, like the illusion had been shattered. It was this like, no, I liked it specifically in that part of my life as a child, playing video games, whatever that did for me in that moment, right? Which is totally different from what it was now. So it's almost these things that you can't even access again, even if you get the thing, the exact same thing.
That's the part
it's
that
not
I'm
the same.
That's why I was saying that it reminds you of someone who you aren't anymore.
Right.
I think that's a super important part of explaining why the feeling can be one of both pleasure and pain at the same time.
Right.
It's like I can't be that anymore. I can never have that experience again because I'm not that person anymore.
Right.
And that can be a sad thought.
I guess, where do you think that's a defense mechanism that we see? Because I would say if I could argue myself in high school, I have the tendency to go, oh, those were such great times. But as soon as I think about it, I go, no, my life's way better right now. Way better. Even back then, I would always go, oh, I can't wait until I'm like by myself and can do what I want and live my own life and do all these things. But the snap sort of thought I have when I think about it, I go, oh, what great memories, which is totally true. Great memories.
I mean, I don't think there's an answer to it, and that's why it's something that's so fascinating and why I'm trying to incorporate this theme into the documentary, because I think it's actually super important to understand some of the feelings that both my brother and I have had surrounding depression. And I think something I'm also looking at now is that when you realize that it's something in the past that you can no longer return to, part of you also is maybe aware that right now is also going to be in the past at some point.
Yeah.
And that in not that long, you're going to look at this period in your
Exactly.
life in the same way. So there's this constant, like, almost feeling of the moment being a fleeting moment that you can never really be. Everything comes and goes. Everything will at some point pass into something else. And
Yeah.
so there's this like constant birth and death of who you are.
Yeah.
And it's constantly changing, which is a good thing. But there's also an element of like, who am I then? And what, like, am I the same person that I was 2 years ago? I mean, I see footage of myself as a little boy, and I can totally see that that's me. But there's also so many things I'm like, I'm so disconnected from that person at this point. And I think it's confusing, maybe.
It's like the difference between continuity and like connectedness. You can be continuous to something, but you can still feel disconnected from it.
Right. So from each day to the next, you are still that same person,
right.
But over a long period of time, at some point, you'd have to look at the two people and say, well, they're definitely different.
Well, even the thing of like, obviously not all the cells in our body change, but most of them do. So even on like a physical level, you'd be almost entirely different.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's when you were saying that you played your video game and you didn't like it anymore.
It's not that I didn't like it; it just wasn't the same, right? I was trying to re-experience
and
that, like,
but you
getting
genuinely
lost in a
expected
game.
it to be the same.
Yeah,
like you had set it up to like, oh, I'm gonna relive this.
I just was like, this is an awesome game.
To me,
I love the soundtrack. I love the way it played. I love everything about this game.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
And people would go, because I played the PS2 and then I never played video games afterwards. So people would like play other shit and I'd always be like, nah, it's this game on the PS2 is the best game of all time. Right?
Yeah.
But it's just like, it was just very strange, I guess. I don't know. You know?
I mean, I'll look at things that I used to be into, and just thinking about the thing gets me feeling a certain way. Like, it's a comforting feeling to picture myself like playing with a certain kind of action figure that I still have in a big box in the basement somewhere.
Wow, what a loser.
Well, they're for Oscar. But like, obviously I know that I wouldn't enjoy playing with them now. But there's this feeling of like, this used to be such a huge part of who I was.
Yeah.
I can imagine vividly how excited I would be to, create these fantasy worlds. Yeah. And to completely, for 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, be lost in this world. Yeah. And there's something about that thought that is both painful and pleasurable at the same time. Yeah. I was saying, when we used to work at your apartment, and every day I would walk by, I don't know if it's a kindergarten or like preschool or whatever it is. Yeah. And every once in a while I'd see a kid, I don't know how to describe it, just like lost in their imagination. Like, you could just tell that they were so zoned in on what they were doing on a bridge, or like just looking at like a piece of wood super closely, and they're like pretending to do something. Yeah. And sometimes with another friend as well. And you could just see this like childish ability to be able to like zone in and imagine something so intensely. Like, I remember my mom would walk into a room and you're playing with a friend or somebody, and it's almost this like shocking moment of like, wait, yeah,
right, like, oh,
this is real.
This
isn't real, rather.
Yeah, like a weird, or I used to, as a kid, and I'm sure everybody did, really believe a movie was happening while I was watching it, especially if I was in the cinema. Be so in it that when the credits started rolling, it's like you're waking up from a dream, and you'd go like, holy shit, right, this isn't reality. Like that strange suspension of animation that you're so able to do that in a sense. Well,
what you're describing is, we've talked about this before, the state of flow.
Yeah,
where you're 100%.
That's like the new
100% of your focus and attention is concentrated on the one thing that you're doing. And so you're able to, time doesn't feel like it's passing. you're not thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very good feeling to have.
Yeah.
It's something that when you come out of it is a very pleasurable experience. And that's something that I think as children we have so much more of, and that as we get older starts to become less and less the thing. And I think part of it is that we're craving to be doing things that do that for us, that get us into a state of flow. And that's something that's a lot more difficult to attain as an adult, because you have to like really follow.
I think the focus in general, it's very hard to focus on one thing without having to be present, without thinking of other things.
Yeah.
You know? As a kid, you could play. I remember I would like play these like little challenges, like a basketball game, and I would be all 6 people playing against each other. Mm-hmm. One of them would be Taylor, who would always win, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I would play these games for like hours of like no other thought except for like, oh, here's this competition where 6 people are throwing basketballs, and in the end, inevitably, I'm going to win.
Yeah.
Against everybody else. But in this story where it's like, ooh, and we're 1 point away, and I remember as a kid actually being I did it so much that at some point I thought there was a problem with me. I was like, oh, I need to stop doing this.
Strong imagination.
Huh?
Strong imagination.
Yeah, I guess. But I think, flow is definitely the most comparable.
I used to listen to music and imagine that I was the artist giving a concert, playing those songs for a huge crowd of people. And I would like pump myself up.
Yeah.
And this would be like while I'm around other people, like on the bus. I remember I'd listen to music on the way to school in the bus. And I would like vividly imagine myself being 50 Cent walking onto the stage and rapping the shit out of these songs and just being so cool. And then suddenly we're at school and I don't even know how we got there.
Right. Nashville, good night. I was like, what?
Yeah. I get I get into a state of flow when I edit.
I'll get when I edit, when I write. I would say almost every time I write, at least for like a minute or two, you know. I obviously can do longer sessions as well, but I would say every time I write, even now, I'm writing something just very quickly. You just slip into it.
Yeah.
Because you have to focus so hard on like what I'm trying to say, and then get out of my head and try to get my thoughts just onto the paper in one like stream. And I think you slip into it quite easily actually when you're doing that. I think living in the present too, the whole idea of, you know, I do think some people live their whole lives just thinking about the past, like, oh, the good old days, and I think some people live their whole life just thinking about the future.
Mm-hmm. Once I get here, I'll be happy.
I'll finally do the thing that, you know. And the importance of like, I guess like appreciating nostalgia, appreciating the things that you had as a child, but also not like longing for them, not wanting to. You know, I don't go, oh, I wish I could play a video game like that again and be in that state. Because there's other things now.
Yeah,
you know,
I think
like
that's,
you said, flow, or like...
That's the part that I'm really interested in bringing into the documentary, is showing that you can have these things now. Right.
Because I think it could really stop you from living your life if you really were like too involved in the past. And not recognizing that it's a skewed memory. You know?
It's review time.
Whoa!
It's review time. Movies. Podcasts. Books.
So we haven't done this in a while. Want to bring it back. Let's just review a couple of things that we've consumed.
All right.
In the last, let's say, week and a bit. And by consumed, I mean things we've like listened to, watched, read.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Well, I won't talk about what I'm reading because I want to finish the book and then I'll talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm also not reading a ton. I'm reading very slowly. But I did watch some movies. I watched 4 Studio... Is it Ghibli or Ghibli?
I say Ghibli.
Okay, 4 Studio Ghibli movies. I believe they're all directed by Miyazaki. I watched Howl's wow, that's a hard word to say.
Howl's Moving Castle?
Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Ponyo. And god damn are those good movies. I mean, for me, comparing those, the only thing I know to compare them to are Disney movies. Yeah. And I guess Pixar.
Which is like Disney.
Animated, yeah, but I guess Studio Ghibli is also Disney at this point. I'm just saying like the classic, like Little Mermaid or like Lion King or I don't know.
Tarzan.
And I'm really like, you know, when I have a kid, like this is the kind of shit that I want to show my kid.
Right.
It's just, I don't know what it is. It's just a different type of storytelling. It's so abstract. There's so many themes that interest me where it's like the bad people always become friends with the good people by the end. So there's this blurred line of like who's bad, who's good, who's evil. There's good in everybody if you can just find it.
There's bad in everybody.
There's bad in everybody. Life is like split between beauty and like this like disgusting side of, you know, it's all very ethereal. It's all very dreamlike. I will say the endings leave me very like, I don't know if it's like un-American way of telling a story. It doesn't leave me feeling satisfied in like oh, I get it and that all made sense and it all wrapped up. It just leaves me like blissed out and I just kind of stare at the credits and there'll be some song going with some small animation and you're just in a very like
thoughtful state.
Yeah, thoughtful state. Very like, it feels like meditative almost.
Feels like you just went through something.
Yeah.
Like you experienced something.
And something very like, oh, that was worth doing.
Right.
You know? Which is crazy that even as an adult, you know, I honestly don't know who these movies are targeted towards, if it's kids or adults or just everybody. Do you know?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I
which is interesting.
Both, right?
Right.
Which I think it's last week I did a blip, which is the random kind of creative experiment that we're posting on Instagram, where it was basically off of I watch these films too, but I'm watching them with Oscar, which means watching them very slowly, kind of like 5 minutes here, 10 minutes here,
right,
in the mornings,
right.
And just realizing how much I was getting out of watching them myself, like things I was thinking about, I was like reflecting on, and it translated into, I became aware of the same thing when it came to reading picture books with him, and seeing how much I was getting out of reading them, and the like profoundness of some of the stories and the messages that are in these very simple children's stories.
Right.
That I was like, all right, I'm going to freaking try and make one myself. And that's kind of where it came from. The fact that I was watching these Studio Ghibli films, and then I've tried to also do a little bit of drawing or painting in this case. Right.
Do you think that's getting less and less nowadays, that there's more of a separation of like things that are made for kids and things that are made for adults? Like if you made a kid's movie and there were some sexual innuendos that the kid would never get, but the adult would get, right? Something that's kind of catered towards both. That nowadays that would just be like, I don't know, a little bit too.
I don't know, because we have a lot of Danish books, like children's books, and they're exactly that, and they have always been like that. Like,
right.
I have books from my childhood, and then we also have some new ones.
Okay.
And they're so like, the fuck is this doing in this children's book? And it's like, who's reading the children's book? The adult is reading the children's book to the child, at least for a lot of the time. Right. So obviously the adult needs to enjoy it too. To me, it makes so much sense. Like you can have like the things that are important in life are important to both children and adults.
I like that point of like, if it's interesting to the adult, then the adult's more likely to want to do the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
if it's a movie, it's like, let's go to the movies. That sounds awesome.
I know the ones that I want Oscar to pick. I know the books that I hope that he wants to read because I want to read them. Right. And I like reading them. Right. And they're the ones I'm like, oh, not this one again. Yeah. Because it's like, there's nothing to it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
But I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question about is there less of that?
I just feel like in this, where everybody's a little bit more offended at the moment,
Yeah.
that I feel like you would have to be
More careful.
Stuff. You know, some mom is going to sue you or something. Some dad is going to sue you and be like, my kid got pregnant after watching your... I don't know why that would happen, but I just have that feeling. I was off of somebody saying, you know, I used to watch SpongeBob a lot, and somebody said that the new SpongeBob episodes, which obviously I haven't seen, are just like so brain dead and so different from the early ones. And I always felt like, yeah, it's not like this profound show for, you know, I wouldn't compare it to like Studio Ghibli or anything, but I always did feel like you could watch the earlier episodes kind of at any age, if that's your humor or whatever, you know. There's certainly little things, like, I mean, it's called like Bikini Bottom, or like little things that you just wouldn't pick up as a kid, that I think now is just completely stripped away from it. You know, now it's like, it's a kid show for kids.
Right.
Like, it won't be fun to watch. But isn't that the best thing, is like when you watch, I can't think of an example, but I've had so many things that I watched as a kid and then watched again as an adult. You know, going back to the nostalgia thing. And in these situations, actually, like, oh shit, I never understood
that
that.
was there. Yeah.
As a kid, I just went, yep, Not even anything like, I don't know, just like little details or something that, not even a joke that would go over your head or anything like that. Just, wow, I never realized that. That thing was, as a, you know, that makes the story make so much more sense.
I have it really strongly since having a baby. I have it with like family related things in like movies. Suddenly I'm just such a like sensitive person when it comes to like, if there's a baby or if there's like a parent who dies in a children's film.
You were talking about that, yeah.
Suddenly like, my God, it's so like, it's really hard to watch all of a sudden, where it used to be like, oh, that's sad. What happens next?
Right.
And now it's like, I almost can't get over this. Like,
right.
It's like, obviously I can, but things like that, how that's obviously totally new. I didn't used to feel like that.
Yeah. Because you have something to compare it to. You could.
I know what that feels like to an extent, or I can imagine what that feels like. I have more context and perspective, and so I can really sink into like, that's a serious emotion right there.
Does it change your relationship to your parents at all? Imagining that they were essentially you. You know, you're getting more insight into what they went through.
Yeah. It's definitely like looking at childhood footage and seeing my dad giving me a bath.
Right.
And I know that I give my son a bath, and I know what that feels like.
Right.
It's like, yeah, I think in theory, you know how they feel, but you don't really know until you've experienced something similar. I mean, my mom always used to say, and still to some extent does, she always used to say, well, just wait until you have kids. Or like, wait until he gets a bit older.
Oh, no. Now you're that guy.
No. And I've always been like, yeah, let's wait. Yeah. And like, I'm still going to feel the same way about certain things. And for the most part, I would say I do feel the same way. Like, a good example would be, my mom gets very nervous when we like climb up stuff or something. Like, be careful, you might fall and get hurt. And I would always be like, no, but we know what we're doing. We've thought about it. We've calculated. We went down and we tested how deep the water is. We're going to jump off and it's going to be fine. Like, we've taken the precautions. Like, there's no need to be more worried than we've already kind of done. We've done the worrying, and now we're going to do the thing. Yeah. My mom would always say, like, wait until you have kids, and then you're going to understand. And I will say I understand the feeling, but I still wouldn't, like, if I can see that the precautions have been taken, like, I'd even do it now with Oscar. You know, he has this like climbing thing. It's basically this wooden triangle with poles that he can climb up, and he can barely walk. I mean, he still falls, and he can not stand for that long by himself, but he will climb up this thing, and then suddenly he'll just let go with his hands, stand on a single wooden pole, like that big, kind of lean up against the next one with his knees, and just kind of stand there. But I can see that he's tested it out beforehand. Like he started doing that a little bit,
Right.
a little lower one, and then he kind of got up, and I can see that he's careful about it. And there's also an element of like, I can see that if he did fall, like what's the worst that would happen? Yeah, he would cry, and he would probably get like a bruise maybe, but I don't think he would. There's not a serious risk of injury, right?
Right.
And there's an element of like, I feel it. I can feel that like I wanna that's dangerous.
Yeah.
But then the like more rational part of my brain is like, yeah, but it's also okay.
Right.
So I definitely can empathize with the actual emotion itself. That it's just a lot more intense. Like everything's a lot more intense.
Yeah.
Like the smallest things, it's just like, oh, this is intense. Become very sensitive.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought before about it's just a shit situation when somebody gets like those freak accidents where somebody dies or gets paralyzed or something, you know?
And that's what it is. It's a freak accident.
Yeah.
But that's a perfect example. It's something sometimes I can't help but picture things happening. Terrible things.
Well, those are the stories that go around. It's like, oh, this person jumped off a cliff and hit a rock that they didn't see or something. Your cousin did this.
Yeah.
Somebody smoked marijuana and now they're in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
I question the validity of that story. Yeah, but it's that thing where it's like...
It takes a lot of effort, at least in my experience, and like I'll have those exact thoughts.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of effort to bring myself to a more rational...
I would imagine, yeah.
Less emotionally charged state. So I can empathize with the difficulty of that.
What were we talking about?
Studio Ghibli. And review time is over. Thank you, Taylor, for taking up all the time.
Did I even talk about the movies? They're good movies. Go watch them.
Yeah, they are. I've been watching
No, review time's over.
I've been watching a show on Apple TV.
Oh, yeah?
Called C.
Oh, yeah.
Which is also, like, very different from what I'm kind of used to watching. I guess I don't really watch that much TV, to be honest, recently. It's a show about... it takes place like 200 years after, or 200 years in the future after an epidemic has wiped out pretty much the entire human population, and the few people left on Earth are all left blind. It's now centuries later. So this idea of vision is like a myth, and people who talk about it are considered, witches, and it's very supernatural, but it's all based in reality. So there's nothing actually fantastical about it, but it's kind of under the premise of like, it's very Game of Thronesy in terms of like costume design, and there's a feeling of like magic happening, but it's not. It's just that it's such a foreign concept, this idea of like, if everyone were blind, what would the world look like? How would people communicate? How do people fight in a battle?
Right.
How do people rise to power? How do people manipulate each other? Very interesting. I would recommend watching it.
How much stuff is there on Apple Music?
Apple TV? I don't know.
Sorry, yeah.
We only just got a free trial of it, and this is what we're watching, so I'll check.
You didn't like scroll through?
No.
Oh. You just saw something and went, okay.
No. Phoebe said, let's watch this. And I was like, all right.
Gotcha. She just wanted to watch Jason Momoa.
Same, so do I. That's why I watch it.
Jason Momoa.
How long have we gone?
45 minutes.
Ooh. Well, should we get into the...
Yeah, let's... Yeah?
Yeah? All right. What's the best way to get into this?
Well, we can get into it by talking about how what we're trying to do with this podcast, or with stuff we put on social media in general, is to be somewhat transparent and open about things that are happening as they're happening.
Yeah.
There's an element of like authenticity that we're trying to create.
Yeah.
Which is difficult because sometimes you're not entirely sure of what you're feeling or what you want to say or what you're thinking, but you just feel something. And so sometimes talking about it can actually be a struggle because you don't know exactly what it is that's going on. You need the time to reflect on it, but we do try to like no, let's try and talk about it in the moment, and let's try and explore it instead of just saying, well, let's deal with it at another point. And we had a little bit of a conversation like that with Robin last week, where we disagreed on something kind of mundane.
Arbitrary.
Yeah, arbitrary is a better word. But that it kind of led to talking about some more like significant things, some more serious things. And we thought it might actually be interesting to kind of continue the conversation on the podcast kind of as an experiment.
Yeah.
To see, you know, it's something that none of us have really thought about.
No.
Since, or that's not true. I've thought about it, but like not discussed since.
Okay.
And maybe it would be interesting to see kind of what is a conversation like that like.
Yeah. So let's set the scene.
Well, as you know, Robin's our new social media wizard. Is that the...
He has a camera on him now.
There he is. He produces the podcast and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And kind of like an ongoing debate, I guess, has been, well, what's the kind of voice behind our presence on social media, right? We want to be ourselves. We want to be as personable as possible. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Like approachable. Like we're kind of trying to encourage people to, you know, let's talk about something on social media. Let's encourage people to voice their opinion. And, you know, because Robin is the one who's running the social media account, does Robin write as if he's us? Or does he write, you know, from more of like a third person perspective?
Yeah.
Mads and Taylor are doing this. Or Mads says this.
Right.
Or do we write, I think this, even though you're the one writing it? So it's like an interesting, I mean, it's not that small of a topic, but that's kind of what we were talking about.
Yeah. We were about to post something. I had said, I'll write a quick description. And then Robin had said, I've been doing the descriptions in the third person. Is it third person?
Third person.
Third person, right.
Specifically the podcast snippets that we've been posting on Instagram, which is like, 45 seconds to a minute.
Yeah.
Of just a clip from the podcast that's subtitled. That's, you know, about 1 point.
Right.
So Robin was writing them.
So he had changed it to the third person, and then he had read it out. And then I think you had said, he asked me like, what do you think? And I was like, I don't care. That sounds fine to me.
Yeah, and I said too, I thought the third person sounded great.
Yeah.
And then you just mentioned that you had written one.
Right.
I was like, what did you write?
Right.
And you read it, and I was like, that sounds way better.
Right.
I thought it sounded a lot more like, I don't know, something about it was like more honest, or more like it made me I could imagine wanting to engage with that because it sounded like I was talking to you.
Right.
Which I think is a good thing.
And then we had a bit of a back and forth on what we should do. And I think overall the theme, I mean, we can get into it, but I think the theme was this idea of like a lot of things had built up for you that you wanted to talk about, and it all came out on this one issue.
Yeah, in the wrong way, I'd say.
I don't know if it's
No, I wouldn't say that it came out in the wrong way. I'm saying it came out in the wrong
time
through the wrong discussion, basically.
Yeah.
So it seemed like I was sort of frustrated about that particular small thing, but really it was just a combination of things that had sort of built up over the past few weeks.
Right.
And that mainly stemmed from, I thought about it afterwards, and it mainly stemmed from the fact that initially, we know each other quite well, but we haven't like spoken to each other on like a daily or weekly basis.
No.
In a while, yeah. And I thought all of the small things that sort of stuck out in the first few weeks, I thought, either I'll just sort of let them pass, and chances are the next day I'll feel better about it, or I'll just bring it up at another time. And that sort of kept on happening until this point where we were talking about something pretty, I wouldn't say trivial, but something that was a small decision, and it seemed to me like a bigger decision because in that split second all these other things started coming up in my head that I hadn't voiced yet.
I think, just to explain what that felt like a little bit for us, I think we were confused as to why you cared so much about it, especially considering that every time we explained why we thought it was a good idea, you agreed with it 100%. And it was even like you who kind of voiced that opinion to begin with when we first got here, that we should be as personal as possible in terms of like our way of communicating and as transparent as possible. So that was why it was confusing, and it made more sense when you then said, well, actually I feel like maybe it's actually something totally different that's coming out. Do you want to talk about like how you felt leading up to this conversation? Like what were some of the things that you were that you felt were building up?
I think it's sort of weird thinking about it in retrospect, because and I said on that day that a lot of these things, they're things that they're feelings that have passed already. But because they hadn't been addressed or brought into existence, they were still very real, or they had the potential to be very real concerns that I had. So I mean, one of the things was that I had been, I don't know, reading all the books that I had and doing all the research that I'd done before I came here. A lot of my ideas were theory based and weren't necessarily based on like things that I tried or that I tried out or we tried out before. And part of me was very set on having specific structures or specific routines of the way that we would do things or the way that I would do things, especially if things pick up and there's a bigger workload at a time where we might not be able to make
micro
decisions as we might not necessarily have the time to make those kind of decisions. So I thought it'd be good to have certain ways of writing for specific posts, as well as having the specific days when we post certain things. So I was sort of conflicted with that when we discussed, should we write it in the first person or should we write it in the third person? Because I had we hadn't spoken about it, but I'd sort of told myself in my head, this is what it's going to be like from now on, which is stupid.
Not really, because we had also agreed with it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, you hadn't mentioned it.
No, but obviously we read them. Obviously we read the previous posts and thought that sounded great. And so, I mean, I had at least for one thought that sounds good. It was only when I heard you read it, I was like, oh wow, that actually sounds better. I hadn't thought about that before. So it was like a new thing happening right then.
I think it's also a thing that is very common, where if you spend more time thinking about something than us, it's frustrating for us to make a decision, kind of a snap decision in the moment.
I think that's probably another thing.
Feels like we're not giving your idea enough weight, maybe, right?
I think, I mean, it all sort of boils down to, I think I realized early on that we don't know each other that well. And you guys know each other very well because you've been working together on a daily basis and having to make quite big decisions. And you've also had discussions where you don't necessarily agree on things, but then you've come out the other side with a... like knowing each other better. But I wasn't privy to that because I wasn't here. So what am I trying to say?
You were saying that there was a feeling of kind of, regardless of what was being discussed, there's an element of 2 against 1, and that no matter, even if you're right, if that's a thing, we can even say that someone can be right or wrong. I think a lot of this is up to interpretation and is very theory based because we're kind of experimenting. That, if we're on the same team,
if you talk to 2 people and you're one, it's very easy to become defensive. Because you feel like you have to
defend yourself. Because you're having to make up for the fact that you're only one person.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, obviously, when you guys have disagreements on things, it's sort of 50-50. You know, it's either the other person eventually thinks that you're right, or you come to an agreement between the two of you. But when it's sort of me coming from having a different perspective and trying to convince you guys of something, is obviously harder as one person. Not necessarily going against two people, but trying to convince two people.
Yeah, even I experienced that. If we were talking about something and you guys agree on something, it's very hard. Your insecurities come out. You go, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I, and then that can lead to you just like extra sitting in your position or trying to like, do.
Which I think is why we're trying to talk about it now as well, because I think one of the most important things is figuring out how can we, not just we, I mean everyone, just communicate better. And that's a perfect example of how can we avoid doing that, because we're obviously not all going to agree on everything. How can we still, like, there's no answer. I'm not looking for an answer right now, but like getting closer to being able to discuss something and disagree and but be capable of hearing what the other person is saying. It's a difficult thing sometimes, because you're focused on trying to explain what your position is. So I was just reading about this on the way here in my negotiation book that I'm reading, which is about how people are often just, when they're not talking, they're thinking about what they're going to say. And when they're talking, they are doing that. They're talking.
That's so
and the
weird.
other person is doing the same thing at the exact same time. So no one is actually, it's like you're having a conversation with yourself in your own head at the same time as someone else is having a conversation with themselves in their head. And it's very, it's a universal thing. I think a lot of people struggle to both listen and also convey what they're trying to say to someone else.
I was listening to a podcast about that yesterday, actually. It just sort of came up in the conversation. But it's definitely, I think, after our conversation last week, it was definitely an uncomfortable conversation on my end, because I was bringing up these things that not only were difficult for me to talk about, but also things that I wasn't necessarily aligned with anymore. But I thought it would be good to bring them up. So I think being able to have a space where I or we or you feel comfortable talking about things, and you feel like the other people are listening as well, is so important. And I think after that conversation, I definitely feel like that's good. Taking things a step up for sure.
I think it also shows the importance of, like, I try to really do this, that if something bothers me, that you say it right away, because things can, if suddenly you have 10 things that bother you, it's actually a way bigger deal than it would have been if 10 things had just been addressed individually. It becomes this thing where it's like, I mean, I'm sure everyone's had these arguments where it's like, and you do this, and you do this, and this bothers me, and this bothers me, and they're all small things, but all together they start to feel like this huge issue. And then it almost becomes bigger than it needs to be, in my opinion, But I think it's a hard thing to do, is that if something, I also find it interesting when you say you didn't really care about these things anymore. They had passed, but you still felt the need to bring them up, which happens to me sometimes too, where I'm like, don't say this thing to this person. You really don't care about this anymore. And somehow my brain will manage to slip it into the conversation for no reason. And I go, oh, great, you said the thing, like, good for you.
But I mean, it's a thought that you had or an emotion that you had, so it's still valid, whether it's now or from the past.
Right.
But what it can do is it can be confusing to the person you're saying it to, because how are they supposed to distinguish between whether or not you still feel that way or not? Because they're hearing it for the first time. Even if
arguably you would still care about it. Even if you're saying you don't, I guess if you vocalize it, you would have to care about it a little bit. At least you'd want them to know that it was something you were thinking about. That it wasn't addressed. Right.
How did you, well, you said afterwards you felt a lot better just by having kind of talked it through. Or just let yourself speak.
I think it's easier sometimes to just sort of I'm not a fan of small talk and sort of having surface level relationships, but that's often easier because you don't have to dive into the things that are...
You don't have to be vulnerable.
You don't have to be as vulnerable, exactly. But I think, and I did feel like vulnerable and uncomfortable during that conversation. But then afterwards, also you saying that, like, at the end of the day, we're not going to be like, oh, who's this weirdo? Like, sharing all these really emotional things. And it wouldn't change your perspective. So that was a big thing as well. But then just letting it out and being able to then put it behind me was a big part of it, you know.
Those things have to be communicated. I totally understand that.
Yeah, and it's better to, like, let's say, talk about it with the people that you felt it with rather than to someone else, like, I don't know, my girlfriend or something like that.
Right.
You know, because then you're not really addressing the issue. You're sort of... Yeah.
A big part of it for me was also, in that specific situation, trying not to say anything constantly. I really felt myself multiple times, and I can't even remember what it was now, wanting to say something back kind of to what you were saying. And it took at least a few times catching myself like, just wait. Just like, you don't have to say anything. You can also just, listen to what you're saying. And oftentimes it's like I said, I don't even really remember specifically what it was, which probably indicates that it's also just an element of like, maybe there are things we can do better. And you don't have to say anything to kind of, well, did you think about this? Or it's almost like a firing back, if you can call it that, that sometimes isn't necessary. Yeah. But in the moment feels very like instinctive to like want to say something back to something that might be kind of we're talking about something where maybe we could be better at, for example, acknowledging the work you do. Maybe that's just it. We should be better at that. It doesn't have to be necessarily.
I think that is the answer.
Even though there might be...
But you saying that shows us something that we didn't necessarily... We weren't thinking about. Yeah. Which shows the difference between you might be thinking, they're not happy with what I'm doing. That's why they're not saying anything. And to us, it's like, we're so used to working with each other on the same things constantly that it wouldn't actually make sense for me to go, hey, good job on that, Mads. Yeah. It would just be a weird situation because it's like, oh, we were just both working on this.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's also something where it's like, it helps us out. And we also haven't been in a position like this where it's like, it's hard sometimes to imagine myself. Like, I know that when I worked at a company and my boss said, hey, you did a really good job on that. I know how much that meant to me. Yeah. But I don't necessarily see myself in that position. It's like something that slowly comes about of like, oh, yeah, now I have to be the one who tells somebody, wow, like, this is a great job. True. I love this, It can feel a little awkward or strange at first.
Yeah, I think it's also because, like, in this situation, it's not just like formal business relationship, So there are a lot of things that sort of go unsaid that you don't necessarily need to talk about.
Right.
Or need to acknowledge as much as you would have to in a like formal work environment.
Yeah.
So it's definitely...
And like when I sent you that thing where I said like, hey, good work today, love to see it. In my head, I was almost insecure about saying it. Like, he's going to be like, oh, who the fuck cares? Like, I don't care what you think. Almost like that is in my head. Like, you wouldn't want to hear that.
Yeah, but then I told you the next day.
Which shows this like need for communication, right? It's like, as we're figuring these things out, it's like, okay, now we figure it. But just so you also know, like, what's in my head when I'm writing that. It's not this like, there's questions there as well. It's like, does he want to hear this? Is this weird for me to put myself in a position like that? Or I don't know.
Yeah. I think we all think about things a lot more than other people.
Yeah, nobody gives a shit. Like, nobody's thinking about that. Yeah. And we've definitely had arguments where we once argued about a movie for like 3 hours to the point where I like had to leave the office.
I cried afterwards.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah, I said we had an argument once that was very similar in the sense that we were arguing about one thing, but it was really about like
10 things.
Yeah, that weren't even being. It just comes out in that way when things aren't being communicated or talked about
as they happen.
Huh?
When things that aren't communicated as they're happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which almost also is like, I think even for the other person, it's your responsibility to say it in the moment if you can. Because it's also like if somebody tells you 2 weeks or a month later that something's been bothering them, it really makes you question like, oh fuck, how long have I been doing this thing and bothering this person, and it just was never, it really makes you feel like shit.
Yeah,
so
it does.
I think
It's almost a mean thing.
Yeah, because you're like, I couldn't know. You didn't tell me.
Yeah,
right.
You let me be annoying basically to you for that long without giving me a chance to
correct
either
that.
Say I'm fine being annoying because that's your problem, or I really don't want to be annoying to you.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do something about it.
Because I think we assume that when somebody does something that bothers us, we like to assume that they must know that they're bothering us.
Yeah.
When I'm in the grocery line and someone stands and doesn't move away from the conveyor belt, I go, they're personally trying to make me, it's like your first reaction.
We should have a compilation of all the times you've said that on the podcast.
It's just like
on the podcast
out
alone.
of the way. Yeah. I don't understand. But when in reality, they're just not thinking about it,
Yeah. It's definitely like choosing your moments as well, because obviously not everything needs to be corrected. Like some things are just like, well, that's probably more my problem than it is anyone else's problem.
Yeah.
And so if you're constantly at every turn correcting people because they're in some way annoying, maybe there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, or maybe you guys shouldn't hang out if there's so many
things. That's what I mean.
What
I mean. And then it's your problem. Like, why are you friends then?
Yeah.
If you're constantly.
Yeah.
That's total side note. I think one thing.
I just wanted to say it because it's like we've done the exact same thing. It is not this thing where we have this perfect ability to communicate.
No, I don't think anyone does.
No.
So in line with that, I think something that I wanted to maybe clarify a little bit, something I've been thinking about, which was, so going back to the thing about us acknowledging like the work you do in certain things. I think part of why I at least don't always do that, which might be, I feel like I should maybe say why.
It's because you hate it.
It's because it's terrible. No, is that I know how much I can be driven by someone not giving me that. And it's always in hindsight that I know that. That definitely I think it's not like a conscious like, oh, I'm going to withhold a nice comment here. It's more just that sometimes I think it doesn't come out because I've experienced how actually like beneficial it can be to not constantly be getting approval that you're looking for, because it drives you to become even better, to really like earn a huge acknowledgement, and that how good that moment can feel. And I have just been thinking about that a little bit, that maybe that's part of why it's not something that comes super naturally to at least me, to at every turn constantly be saying, I like, not that you're asking for that either. That's not what I'm thinking. Like, I don't know how often I've been so fucking pissed off at people for not acknowledging all the shit I just did. And then afterwards being like, yeah, but that then made me go and work on it for even longer and make it even better and feel genuinely proud of it afterwards. And there's definitely something to that as well.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between approval for like creative things, or a couple of times you've shown something and I think there wasn't a big reaction. And you want something and it's like, it's like, I can't give you a 10 out of 10. A 10 out of 10 would be like a you made this fucking insane video, or like you made a feature film, it has to be reserved for that of it. But I do think there's something with there's a difference between approval and just thanking somebody for like staying late at the office or something, right?
Yeah.
Because I've definitely had moments at work where it's like I stay late or I do something extra, and again, it doesn't have to be every time, but it does mean a lot that somebody at least recognizes that, like, hey, I saw you there last night working on this thing or whatever. They're not going, oh, this is an amazing product, or this is this creative masterpiece. It's more just I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
Which again, I also wouldn't do every day, but I'm sure it's nice to like that that we see you working long hours, for example. That it doesn't go
unappreciated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I definitely I don't want constant appreciation either. It's just the because I think, as you said, there's a lot of value in not showing appreciation all the time for every little small thing, because you'll I feel like you'll be more driven to work on. You can be more driven to make something better if you're not constantly like sheltered by someone giving you approval, even if it's not the best work that you could have created. But I think it's just important to, as an employee, to feel that overall sense of appreciation from the person that you're working for. Not all the time, but in the times when you need it. And if you've created that framework for like communication from the outset, then it's a lot easier for you to know, even if they don't directly say it.
I think you said something very well there, which is when they need it, which I think that's so useful to know for us.
Yes.
It's when it starts to become something that would hinder you, this actually would help you to do a better job. That's when it's super, super important. I mean, if we talk about the like working long hours, for example, part of me is also thinking, we never established how long hours you should work. What hours we work, what hours I work. To me, that's us telling you that's when you should work. We haven't said we're expecting this of you. That's something that you're choosing to do on your own time, which we notice. But it's also not something that we're not asking for it. And so when you do it, there's also an element of you taking on that responsibility and putting in the extra work on your own time. And another part, the Danish culture, and I'm not saying I'm part of this, but it's something that's like we think about it quite often. This idea of the work hours here in Denmark are pretty extraordinary in a lot of ways. They finish work at like 3 or 4 every day, and this philosophy is built on the idea that you want to spend time with your family. It's a work-life balance that's so important here, that people actually look at it as a bad thing when people work late. Phoebe always brings up the fact that when she first started working here for the company she was working at, she sent an email one night at like 10 before she went to bed, just finishing up something. And the following week, her bosses had called her in and had asked her if she was okay. She's like, yeah, why? And she's like, well, you were working in the evening. Are you not capable of, have we given you too much to do? Are you not able to do it in the time that you're supposed to be doing it at work? And it had just completely like shifted her entire mentality about the whole thing. There's kind of I think at least an element to be taken from that, which is working longer isn't always just the better thing. Maybe like someone who's able to figure out a more efficient way, or able to adapt and like work faster, or even has the ability to say, like, this is too much. I need a little bit less to be able to do it. Is also a valuable skill.
what you said about it sort of being, like not having fixed hours, or you not saying, oh, Robin, you need to be here at such and such time and stay until this time. I personally prefer that a lot more to fixed hours, because then I feel like there's a lot more that can come from by taking the initiative yourself. So by me not being late, by me deciding to stay, like not leave on the dot right after you've left, or like coming in on the weekend, for example, it then allows me some freedom for the more like creative side of things. Because if you're working the same hours every single day, week in, week out, I feel like it's easy to create that sort of that, like, let's say you finish at 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, the creative side of your brain shuts down, and you go into like passive mode, where you're like, I don't know, you listen to music, you watch films, or whatever you do in the evening. Whereas now it's like, by not really having these fixed hours, I'm still thinking about work outside of work, which is, I mean, it's an interesting, like, working in any creative industry, it's an interesting job to have, I think. So then being able to have these ideas and stuff pop up like at random times of the day, I appreciate that a lot. Yeah. Rather than having these fixed hours where you then have to like dive in and go hard, every single day.
I agree. I prefer that as well. I think that if you go home and can just go, well, it's somebody else's problem to deal with. It's 3 o'clock. I'm checking out. That's fine if that's the kind of job you want. Yeah. Personally, I'm more invested, I would say, in what I do, that I wouldn't want to do that. If there's a project that I want to finish, it's ultimately on me to finish it, and it's up to me if I want to put in extra hours. I could also say, okay, I'm done. Yeah. But I think specifically in creative fields, like you said, I might be in a state of flow, or I might be, I don't know, really figuring something out this night. That doesn't mean I'm really starting to figure out that doesn't mean every night you're putting in 12, 14-hour days or whatever and like killing yourself over something. It's just finding the moments where it makes sense to put in the extra time and realizing that you're ultimately responsible for finishing it. Yeah. And that will also give you the sense of purpose and accomplishment at the end of it. For example, the podcast intro, you could have worked your hours, not come in on the weekend, finish something. I guarantee you at the end of it, you would have gone, it's okay. The feeling of accomplishment of having done something really good is because of the extra work that was ultimately put into it. Yeah. And I think there is, I'm not saying that's the key to life, but there's obviously something to that you're proud of what you do. There's sometimes that takes a little bit of extra work. Yeah, there's definitely beneficial sides to both of those like ways of working. When you have like the way people work here, if they start out at 8 or something and finish at 3, then
they start at 9.
Okay, start
start at 9, finish at 3.
Okay, I say that. I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
But then you have, if you need that separation between your work life and your home life and your family life, then obviously that's good. But if you enjoy your work as much as, say, we do, then it's also good to create that space for yourself where you can come up with ideas or can be working in the times that aren't in these fixed hours,
It's very funny because it's the exact opposite of America, the work life here. Yeah. That would be like,
I think there's something to be taken from both.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. I think it's somewhere in the middle probably.
Yeah.
Because it also becomes a problem if you're choosing to put in extra hours and so that you can get ahead or that you can make something that you're proud of. And ultimately, that's going to be beneficial to you. If that starts to then bleed into like some kind of resentment or something forming between you and the person you're doing that for, because you're still choosing to do that.
Right. It also allows for a bit more of what's the word, meritocracy in America, where it's like you can stay late and put in the extra hours and you will get probably promoted over the other person that's where it could go wrong too, that people would then, work too much or spend too much time doing that. But there's also something you want.
Yeah.
When I was working at a company, I was like, I want that opportunity to be able to show that I want this job more than the other person.
Yeah.
This is getting into some really interesting territory, because this is a huge part of the like equal pay debate between men and women, which is there's a big argument that a lot of women are just not capable of putting in those extra hours because traditionally women
They're lazy.
Are no.
Oh.
I'll cut that out.
Are traditionally the family caretakers.
Right.
And so the idea of staying late and working an extra hour, well then, okay, who's going to take care of their children?
Yes. Yeah.
That in a lot of situations, men are just have that opportunity more so than women do.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does. It's not that they don't want to, or that they're not as into their project or into their work or want to get as much done. It's just purely that they have something else that obviously also matters.
Yeah, if you have a kid, I mean, that seems like a very,
I mean, I can certainly feel that there's, a lot of times when I'd say have to leave. Obviously, I'm choosing to, but I'm choosing to do it for a reason that I can't possibly imagine not making that choice.
Yeah.
Just to spend time with my kid before he goes to bed. And if that can't happen too many times in a row, that I get home after he's asleep. So if it's not like a.
But wouldn't that show that it affects both? That if you're a guy staying late, then you're just kind of a bad parent in a way.
Yeah. But I think that's where where traditionally comes in. Yeah, right. Because it's something that's like, baked into society. It's hardwired into society.
Right.
Yeah, I also heard that here the government supports parents who have kids around our age and want to study. Like they fund that. And I was talking to my housemate like last week about how a lot of her friends have kids, but they don't struggle because the government funds their studies and supports them financially as well. So they encourage this, like as you said, family life, like prioritization of your personal stuff, which is really
very big here.
Yeah.
That's also like in Los Angeles, like I didn't know anybody who would want to have a kid before like 35 or something. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, you should be supported to make whatever decision that it is that you want to do, whether it's prioritizing your family or prioritizing work or whatever else, Yeah, I think in Denmark that's...
So if I was, I'm not disagreeing with you, but here's a fun little example. If I was always working until like 9 in the evening and always showing up early, and I was also telling you guys that like stuff's really not going well at home, like I'm never there, would you encourage me to keep doing that?
No, definitely not. But
even though that's what I want to do.
It obviously you have. If you don't have a partner and you don't have children, you have fewer responsibilities, so you can make more decisions for yourself.
Right.
So
that's what I think. If we both worked at the same company, but I stayed longer, I think I should be allowed to have the promotion or whatever on top of you, because I'm prioritizing that over you. I'm not saying one priority is better than the other one, but it would make sense to me that in that scenario, that would make sense. Yeah. Whether you're a man or a woman, I would just be like,
But that's the feeling. That's where the feeling of that's not fair comes from.
You get to enjoy all the things of like family life, and I would say it's like both sides get something out of it, right?
I think I agree with you.
Yeah,
but that's I would imagine
it's interesting to me that they would say no, everybody can only,
Well, it's like that's just not how it works.
But is it like that at pretty much all companies in Denmark?
I have no idea.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have no idea.
No idea. But I do know that is a
Common thing, yeah.
place when you talk about specifically equal pay issues.
Hmm.
Is that
That's the reason for that.
Is it just a part of the conversation?
Right,
Are you
right.
not going to promote in this case, it tends to be more often a man. That's why.
Okay.
It's an interesting thing. That you're not going to promote the man who, works extra hours every evening, goes on all the business trips,
Right.
works when he gets home as well, over the woman who goes home to her family and doesn't go on the business trip and doesn't work when she gets home.
Right. But what if they're both men?
Yeah, you would still promote the other guy, but because there's a very clear distinction
Right.
between the men who do that and the women who do that.
Right. Right.
Right.
That's a weird one. I don't know how I feel. Yeah.
Well, you're obviously gonna promote the guy who's putting in all the. I mean, unless they're doing a shitty job.
Right.
But
Right.
obviously, when you spend more time on something, you invest more of your life into something.
Right.
Chances are you're gonna do a better job at it.
Yeah.
But then I do see the other side of like, okay, so someone's decided to have a family. What, they just can't ever be promoted now? There would have to be some incentive to like, well, that's a good thing too.
Yeah.
Maybe that incentive should come from the government. I don't know if it should come from the company necessarily or something, but it's an interesting. As soon as I put myself in that position, I could see it being that would be frustrating.
Hmm.
It's just hard to.
But I have to believe in a meritocracy at the end of the day, and whoever's doing the best work deserves to get. I would argue you could do the best work with less hours. There would probably be a way,
Hmm.
to
I was
show
just
your
gonna
value.
say that, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that weighs a lot harder.
Yeah, but again, it'd be different if having kids wasn't your decision. It's like you're making those choices for a reason, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's huge
If
value
it's like
in that.
a lottery or something.
Yeah, if it was that, like
You
then
were
we'd be in this
chosen.
weird, like I have to raise this kid.
Yeah.
I have no choice.
Hmm.
Yeah. And I'd be curious to see, like, are people who are more successful necessarily happier?
I think no.
So
Definitely not.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. So that's another part of the argument, right? Like, is that then moral to basically encourage that kind of behavior by giving the people who are putting in that kind of
yeah.
time, if you could argue it to be somewhat unhealthy or too much.
Yeah.
But you're encouraging them by giving them more money, by promoting them, by giving them more opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That's very complex.
Okay, it is complex because I think it's where you end up. If you're doing something just for the money, I think at the end of the day you're going to end up feeling empty if you don't have that purpose or whatever. But if you're putting in a lot of work, like I would say with our company,
Yeah.
put in a lot of hours, a lot of work, but it's going to pay off to me what I think is like a very purposeful job and something I feel very happy doing. It's not going to be the only thing. I also want a family and things, but it's it does feel like it's paying. It would pay off for me.
I think
having put in that extra time.
a big thing with that is you are the ones making the decision. I think when you're working for someone else,
Yeah.
Especially in big companies, you always put that. You often. It's easy to put the blame on someone else to if you're not doing the work, put the blame on someone else rather than yourselves. So I feel like I don't know if I'm wording this the right way. If you're doing it for yourself, you're obviously going to be a lot more motivated because it directly influences you. But if you're working for someone else or lots of different people,
Right.
then because it doesn't affect you, it might not necessarily affect you directly, you'll probably be less motivated and less driven to do more work then. Does that make
If you
sense?
do it yourself, because you mean it's for ourselves?
Yeah.
that it would be more driven then.
So because
Yeah. But I would argue I had the same mentality when I worked for somebody else, because it was still for myself at the end of the day. Even though I'm doing somebody else's project, a lot of times it'd be like, I still get satisfaction out of doing a good job on this, even though it's not my project necessarily or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
You want to say there's a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely more for myself. But I would say it's not like it suddenly just goes away. Like, it never made sense to me when I worked.
Yeah.
Some people would leave on the minute that like clock strikes 6, boom, gone.
Yeah.
And it'd be like, it just doesn't feel very efficient. Like, if I told my boss, I would rather stay 20 minutes sometimes extra, but I would want you to let me leave. If I'm done, don't make me sit till 6.
But there's the mentality shift. It's you are the one doing it for yourself, even though you're working for someone else.
Right.
Whereas other people may be thinking, oh, because I'm working for someone else, it's not really my problem.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, when I leave, they can deal with it.
Right.
Or they're going home to their children.
Yeah, okay.
You could have
true.
worked
Yeah.
quicker during the day to get the
yeah.
extra 10-minute thing done.
Right, so you're saying
Yeah.
someone specifically who leaves at 6 even though they're not done with their task.
Yeah, it's just like, here's my work for the day.
Yeah.
You know, and I would say this specific person, I see him fucking around. There's nothing wrong with that. But it would frustrate me at the end of the day. It's like, you just had to do this small little thing.
Yeah.
And then you could have, but I also think it's the company's responsibility. It frustrated me so much that I would say, I'm willing to stay as late as I need to finish.
Yeah.
But again, if there's a day and it's slow, and I would go like, hey, can I go home? And they would be like, what? No, you can't go home. You're like on the clock. And I'd be like, but there's nothing
True,
to
just
do. And they
keeping
said,
you
just
around
sit here
for
in
the-
case something
Yeah,
happens.
yeah.
I'd be like, this is so dumb.
I had the exact same thing in London. Like there'd be days, usually on Fridays, where we wouldn't have anything to do
Yeah.
after like 3:00, but we'd still have to stay until 6:30 because our like supervisor was staying until then because they had work to do.
It makes
like-
no sense.
Yeah, but I mean, as you said, like if you have a family and you choose to make that your priority, then
Yeah.
like
I would also argue, like, obviously family is not the only, like, just taking care of yourself or like having a hobby or
Yeah,
going
yeah.
to the gym. All those things
Anything,
are
yeah.
super important.
yeah. Just happens to
And
be-
reasons to
yeah.
leave. But again, I mean, I guess if it was like, what kind of work schedule works, I would say we should try to start to become more. I agree with you. I find it weird that people come home at the same time every day.
Yeah.
You know, I guess it makes sense if like,
definitely-
because
I
of
mean-
schools and you got to pick up your kid. Yeah, if you're on a rigid schedule, that makes sense.
As long as the majority of people are on that, you kind of have to do it that way.
But I don't see. F them. Could do my own way.
Well,
But if everyone did it their own way,
you-
like let's say this
Yeah.
is obviously a small decision, but for us,
If
like
the bakery closed at 4, I go, okay, they close at 4. That's fine.
yeah,
I'll go before 4. They get to make their own schedule. I don't. Who am I to say what schedule they should be on? I mean, that's why I'm like so like keen on starting my own business, because those things really bothered me. That it was like, you have to wait. You have to be here at this time,
Yeah.
and you have to leave at this time, right?
But
Or you
it's-
have to stay here till this time.
Yeah.
And there's so many situations like that one where it's like you're there. There's nothing to do, and you're like, it's just because somebody said we have to do it this way.
Yeah.
We're all sitting here like idiots for 2 hours, right? Not living our lives because of what? Because of some social norm that it's like, oh no, you have to stay here because
yeah.
I still can't answer the question. It makes no sense.
But maybe it's also a good thing for. I'm saying that this is obviously the minority, but for those people who are like super driven, if
Yeah.
they're then if they were then willing to stay until like 10:00,
Yeah.
them having a cutoff time also then encourages them to prioritize other things as well after that time.
That's true as well, yeah.
I was just gonna say that.
But again, it's like a choice of freedom, or like if you want to work extra, work extra.
most people would probably abuse it, though. That's I think
what do you mean?
I think
Staying extra?
Yeah, and I think or leaving early.
Yeah,
I think people would start to do that when they didn't have to, and then having a general like it has to be at 6.
But we don't tell you.
no,
when you
but
have to.
I think this is a different situation.
Yeah, it's
think.
definitely.
Yeah, I think.
But I think you should hire, like I would hire people like you. I would rather tell you what your day's tasks are, or like here's your tasks for the week or for the month.
Yeah.
I don't really care how you get them done. If I started noticing like you're not getting a lot done for what we're paying you or something, then I would raise concerns and stuff.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you get it done, I really don't. You could come in at, not here because I live here, but if we had an office, you know, I would say here are the times we need you there for the podcast or for whatever. it's nice for you to be there during the day, so you work with us. Obviously, that's
Yeah.
especially if we're working on something where we need to work together. Okay, then you need to be there. But it's really up to you to kind of like the minutia of it. Of like, I want to come in at 9 or 9:30, or I want to leave at 6, or I want to come in at 9:30 and leave at 6:30 instead. I don't care.
But I think that's also the thing. What I was getting at with it being your responsibility. Then at the end of the day, it's up to you to get that work done.
And then you get the satisfaction out of it. I think and it gives you a feeling of you're more in control. I think a lack of control can feel really like I don't know, scary, and like that. It made me feel scared when I had a lack of control. I want the boss to think I trust Taylor enough to he's going to get it done. He's done it enough times. I don't have to go in every day and check up on him. I told him I need it on this day, and I'm sure it'll be there, or he will come to me and say, I have concerns. I don't think I'm going to finish this or something. I think that trust, gives you a lot of purpose in what you're doing.
So let's take your old job, for example.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened if they had implemented a more like free work schedule where people could come and do their own thing? Basically, like you set your hours.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened?
There specifically,
Yeah.
I think when a company gets big enough, you could have a little bit of wiggle room, but you, as an assistant editor, you need to be there when the editor is there. That's the job you're doing. So you're going to be constrained to when the editor's there, and then you need people there at night as well. We had to have people working during the night. So that's a very, I guess, different situation. People had to be there at certain times. Especially if you're working a 24-hour cycle. It's like if you don't show up at 4, the other person can't leave. Right. So there are situations where I would say, in that situation, it's really important to be there on time. For the situation I was in, like working on a show or something where they're like, hey, you're doing the graphics, we need those in 3 weeks. And here's the 20, 30 graphics that we need.
Something that you're the only one who's going to be working on.
Yeah. That then it would be, okay, well, it's you working on it. You can set your own hours. You have to figure out how to get that done. And the more they did that to me, the less questions they asked, the more I also felt like it's really my responsibility. I do feel like the more micromanaged you are, the less responsibility you kind of take on.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I'm not saying here's this answer for everybody in the world, because I totally understand there's constraints and some people need to be at work at a certain time. But for me personally, I this is a way better situation. Still trying to figure out my work hours. Yeah. Okay, we'll see you next week on the Burning Boat Show.